Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, according to the government's own ethics watchdog, social media is primarily responsible for fueling abuse and intimidation towards political candidates in June's general election. This independent committee, it's on standards in public life, also suggests legislation should be introduced to force social media companies to deal with illegal content to stop the intimidation of those in public life. Let's hear from the chair of this committee, Paul Bew.
Millions of people in this country have an interest in everybody who lives here, in the quality of our parliamentary democracy, in the quality of the people who feel able to come forward, and they have an interest too in a form of political debate which is frank, sometimes tough and aggressive. It's always been so, it's always been raucous, but contains an element of respect within it for the other side. And it's really important that the parties come together. This report will not work if the parties don't come together and agree some kind of common code of conduct.
Let me begin just by saying, Jenny Chapman, do you get much online abuse?
Not like some colleagues do,
no.
I'm pleased to say.
You're not at the bad end of it?
I don't seem to be. I mean, I've been fortunate in that respect. I have had some, but nothing like I've seen some colleagues get, and it's disgusting.
No, some of it is unrepeatable.
And I don't care which party they're from.
Sure, I understand. You know. George Eustace, do you?
Well, I'm not on Twitter, and one of the reasons is I've always...
So you might, but you just don't know.
I've always sort of had the view, though, that in 140 characters, when people are anonymous, it's too easy for people to say things anonymously that they wouldn't say to your face. And I think what we've seen is that spilling over into debate generally. So at the election, I'd really detected a sort of coarsening in our political debate, hustings where sensible people, moderate people were walking away because they couldn't take all of the acrimony, and people being shouted down and abused in the audience, and it's really not helpful.
Does the government yet have a policy to deal with this online abuse?
Well, you know, there's a limit to what you can do with regulation on this, but I think where you've got the extreme things, death threats and the like, obviously the content providers and those social media platforms have got a responsibility to act. So I think this is a really interesting report.
But at the moment they don't. Under the law they don't, because they're regarded as hosts rather than publishers. If a newspaper or broadcaster published that sort of stuff, we would be held responsible because we're publishers. The online platforms are not. So should the government have a policy to change that? Well,
it's a difficult area, but and we have said that we're going to look carefully at this report, and we're open to taking steps in this area. You know, I think the social media is a new phenomenon, a new platform, and like anything that's new, well, it takes a while for the regulatory environment to be able to catch up with it and manage it properly. We've got to be careful that we protect free speech, and you wouldn't want something too draconian. But I think where you've got these extreme death threats and the like, we do need them to act, and we should be looking at that.
Does Labour have a policy for this?
I think the approach that's been taken by the Home Affairs Select Committee is the right one, and that Yvette Cooper's led on, where the publishers, the Facebook, Twitter,
but they're not publishers at the moment.
Well, I know, but I think that they ought to be, and that they ought to be held accountable. But let's not forget that it is quite sick individuals making these posts in the first place, and it's they who ultimately do need to be held accountable as well. But what I'm trying to get to is that
either of you have a credible policy towards it. The committee recommends that rather than regarding these social media sites as simply content aggregators, they should be regarded as publishers, which brings with it a legal liability. Does Labour support the committee's policy?
My understanding is that we're looking at it. Me personally, I think that we ought to move closer to that position. And I think we're not just talking about Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Look at the chat rooms on newspaper websites, there are lots of different ways that this kind of abuse is meted out, not just to people in the public eye, but to people who are the subject of newspaper stories. The whole thing needs to be looked at in the round. It's not good for our democracy.
But newspapers are subject to the law.
You look at some of the comment sections on newspaper websites, and I think you'll find that very few of those comments would actually find their way into a
quite a
story.
lot of them have now been changed because they are subject to this.
It's not being enforced, though, Andrew. Seriously, have a look at it. It is not.
Well,
I
do actually look at quite a lot
it needs to be properly
comments. They're nothing like the social media. Certainly not in the mainstream newspaper comment sites, because they're moderated.
They're not. That's not true.
Well, excuse me. The Guardian website, for example, is moderated.
Guardian, maybe.
The Telegraph website is moderated. The Times website is moderated.
So
they're moderated. It's my business. I know what's happening.
When somebody makes a complaint, it might be dealt with.
That's a different matter.
It takes somebody to make that complaint.
Let me ask you this. Could you do this without EU legislation?
Yeah, you can. I mean, we have our own domestic laws now on newspapers.
But under EU legislation, social media platforms are classed as hosts. They're not liable for the content. That's EU law.
Well, obviously, EU law is about to be less of a problem when we leave.
What I'm saying is, a couple of years.
Well, no, but for the UK, we've got our own domestic approaches now on broadcasters, which are very strict, and on newspapers as well, where we have common law that's developed in areas such as privacy. And yes, absolutely, and defamation. It's open to us to be able to extend.
But is it your understanding that you could change the way Jenny Chapman's been talking about making these social platforms publishers? Could you do that under existing EU law?
Well, I'm not even sure that's the right way to approach it. My honest view is that they're not publishers, but they are a platform. But the fact that they're a platform shouldn't mean you can't do anything about abusive content. So you might say they're not responsible for the person.
Under EU legislation, they are, quote, not liable for the content.
Yeah, but you could. It's quite possible, in my view, to bring forward some kind of approach where you could make them, have responsibilities on them to take down content that was clearly against the law, while not making them personally liable for the comment that somebody put up. There are ways around this, I'm sure, Andrew. Without, it's a new platform. It's a new way of doing things. So they're not publishers in the traditional sense.
The report found that Conservative candidates were significantly more likely to be subjected to intimidation than Labour. Why do you think that is?
I think if that's the case, it doesn't matter which party somebody's standing for. They shouldn't be subject.
But why do you think Conservatives are?
I honestly don't know. I mean, if we knew why people did this and why they picked the people that they did, we might be more successful in trying to do something about it. But I would hate for this to put somebody off standing for any party.
But the point of the committee is that it is.
Well, that's why we've got to take it very, very seriously.
Professor Tim Bale, Queen Mary University, told the inquiry, politics has become more polarised since 2015 when Jeremy Corbyn took over the Labour Party. There's been an influx of people into the Labour Party who are rather more used to a kind of factionalised and vituperative culture of politics. What do you say to that?
Well, if that's happening and there are members of the Labour Party conducting this kind of behaviour, then they need to be brought to book, kicked out of the party and dealt with. But I don't think it's as simple as that. I think that people in the public eye, whether they're parliamentary candidates or other high-profile people, have become almost legitimate targets to say whatever you like, make whatever comments you want about them or their families. And I think we need to understand better what it is that makes people feel that that's acceptable.
I understand all that. What I was trying to get this morning
was
what the political policy response would be, but clear from both of you will have to wait.